for people that might read the title of your book or hear a little bit about what you're about and say, oh, that's part of the problem in the world, right? Teaching somebody to be a man at 13 and these types of things. Obviously, the conversation we're having should be partially addressing that because we're talking about the full spectrum of being a man. But how do you think about it in today's world when you hear some of the commentary about what it is to be a man and maybe some of the negatives with it? How do you respond to that?
That's a great question. I would say, there's definitely a part of me that agrees. Like, there are men in power who have abused their power, and there are women who have suffered from that. I don't mean to shy away from that. But I also think that if men acted as virtuous men, as men who were not so weak, it would be one way of putting it, or insecure about themselves, if they acted like how a real man should, then they wouldn't be abusing or hurting or taking advantage of other people.
Mm.
So I think what we're aiming for here is virtuous masculinity, the good kind of, like, that loving father type masculinity, not the um, puffing your chest, machismo, I'm
Mhm.
better than everyone else type masculinity. So I see this as a solution to that problem, not as adding to the problem. When it comes to, like, this whole idea of, like, questioning manhood, what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? I mean, I'll be honest, I think I sit pretty strongly on one side of the argument, and I think all your listeners can probably guess which side that is. Um, I mean, as a Christian, as a believer in God, I believe that God made us all man and women, and that's written in our DNA. And I totally understand that, uh, you know, people have people have strong feelings, they have strong attractions, and I don't mean to minimize those. I believe them when they say those things, but I also believe that we live in a broken world. For me, like, I'll be totally honest, like, in my life, I've struggled with pornography before, and that's a desire in me, that's like, it was a strong desire, it's real, but it's not necessarily healthy,
Mhm.
so, and I think that all of us, to one degree or another, in some aspects of life or another, we go through these strong feelings that they are real, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily good. And one more thing I'll say is, like, as a 13-year-old, your your mind is still growing so much. You're not a grown adult. I don't know if this is true or not, but I'm not a psychologist. There's that saying that, like, your mind doesn't fully develop until 25 years old.
Yeah,
Well,
I think that's right.
at 13, you're only halfway there. And having these other men who are 25 years and much older, they've seen a lot of life, um, giving bestowing that title upon the boy and giving him something that he hasn't, not letting him make the decision, but having these older people who have more excuse me, more life experience helping him through that process. I kind of liken it to uh, a tail wagging a dog, rather than the dog wagging the tail, right? Like, you're only 13. I think to make a decision, like, to transition from one gender to another, like, that's a huge decision, And at 13 years old, I'm not sure. I don't believe that anyone is really ready psychologically to make a decision like that. So I think having their elders, having these people who genuinely have the kid's best interest at heart, helping him to grow, is super helpful.
Yeah.
And I think that other cultures in history, whether that's the Jewish bar mitzvah or, like, the Australian Aboriginal walkabout,
Mm.
we see these rites of passages in other cultures that have been happening for hundreds and thousands of years.
Mm.
And I think that, I know that's the difference between a progressive and a conservative. Progressives are always pushing the limits, conservatives are always saying, no, 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 let's pump the brakes. But I think that there is value in looking at, this is what we've been doing for thousands of years, and this is what other cultures have done. And uh, we shouldn't get away from that. It's written on our hearts as humans to go
Mm.
through rituals like this from one stage in life to another.
Mm. So much to unpack in that answer, and I'll start here. I think, ironically, as someone who does a podcast and spends a lot of time talking and having conversations, I think words often fail us a lot in society, right? You said a phrase before, and I know exactly how you said it, and I'll state it in a second. But you said a real man before. Take that phrase alone, right? Somebody could hear that phrase in isolation, and somebody could think positive, somebody could think negative. There's so much weight you could put on that phrase and what it means. And I think that's often what does us wrong in society, because we don't actually understand the true underlying meaning and nuance to what some of these things mean. Because as you're articulating that, as you started in that explanation about, being a real man, the virtuous man, as you said, somebody could hear real man and think, oh, that's kind of like a jerk who's a patriarch, who womanizes, who puts people down, who's trying to prove how tough he is. Because there's been that connotation on that phrase. But as you're using it, you're saying it like, no, 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 the real man is the virtuous man. Part of that is the masculine side of protecting, but part of that is the communicating and all the other stuff we said. And I think it's a really important distinction. And the reason why it's important to just not hear phrases and buzzwords and things like that, but actually understand what somebody's saying and take the time to appreciate the nuance and complexity of it. And I think that's really important. And I think it gets to the point about the kind of man versus woman. I'm curious what you think about this, because this is something I think about a lot. I mean, from as far as I can tell, there is science that we know, and science only takes us so far. There is certain biology to it that seems real. So let's put aside the science for a second. Let's just say, the sense that somebody feels like I'm a man or I'm whatever. I would think there's a spectrum, like there is in most things, right? And there's certain men who sit on the spectrum and sit to a side, which is they feel like they want to go out and cut down trees and, do all these things that are traditionally manly. And there's some other men that might, and there's people in the middle that have both of these sensations, that think like, I never want to cut down a tree. I don't want to go out there and sweat and do that. I want to, create art, or I want to dance, or I want to do something else. In those terms, are both of them still men? And to your point, a real man could be either of those things. There's deeper, more virtuous things that make a man, and maybe that's kind of part of where we're going on this. Or is it, as some people believe, where they're actually the title man and woman, they are the incorrect titles, because yes, we have different body parts and we have a function from a biological perspective, but in terms of how we think and what we do, the virtues, the other aspects of it, there actually is no place of gender in that. Like, how do you think about that piece of it?
Well, you know, putting it like that, I think, yeah, you could say it kind of is a spectrum, in that there are some men who are more manly, Paul Bunyan type, and there are
Sure.
some men who are more geeky computer type, to use an example. But I do think that in both of those cases, um, both of those type of men, those archetypal men, could do well to meet in the middle. They could both learn from one another, right? That guy who's always outside cutting down trees, he could do well to spend some time with that man who maybe uses his head more often, or is a better communicator, is a little softer, right? And that man who is a little softer could probably do well to spend some time with that guy who's outside, wearing steel-toed boots, has a hard hat on, and is doing construction or whatever it is, right? So I think that becoming a man is a process. We're constantly learning new things, and we can learn from other men, and meet somewhere in the middle, this virtuous manhood that you and I are talking about. At its core, I think that what it means to be a man, for me, I would answer that question by quoting scripture, and that, saying that scripture says that husbands, love your wives in the way that Christ loved the church. And the way that he loved the church is by dying for the church. So it's that self-sacrificial type of love, right? He's thinking about other people's interest before his own. So whether you tend to be that guy who is the Paul Bunyan guy, or if you tend to be the computer geek type of guy, I think the common denominator for what makes a virtuous man is how self-sacrificing are you?
Mm,
How much are you living for yourself, and how much are you living for other people?
mm,
God has given us all different gifts. Some are some some people are gifted physically, some people are gifted, um, mentally, some people are gifted emotionally. They have an incredible ability to connect with other people. We all have special gifts, but I think the common denominator about manhood and personhood, how good of a person are you, is how much are you living for yourself and how much are you living for other people?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's right. I think it is personhood. I know we're talking about men in this, but I think it's true of all people. That's an important trait to think beyond just yourself